If you stimulate the vagus nerve, you can affect the immune system in a way a lot like what you do with drugs like Humira and Enbrel and Remicade that suppress the immune inflammatory response when it's pathological. But we can do it in such a refined way, so much better than drugs, because drugs are sort of like a hammer. They hit the system in a way that there's no real control. You're just shutting all the inflammation down. That's why there's all the side effects of, you can't take it if you've got, tuberculosis, or if you've got other problems, and there might be cancers that arise. All of those things arise because the drugs are sort of simple. They're stupid. They just come in and they suppress everything that they're supposed to suppress, independent of whether or not that could harm you.
Hi, love. This is Orion's World, previously known as Stellar Life Podcast. I'm Orion, transformational coach, hypnotherapy speaker, and a woman who turned deep pain into wild possibility. I overcame trauma, poverty, abuse, depression, infertility. Doctors gave me 5% chance of conceiving. But I rewrote my story. I created a new one, and the life they said was impossible. Now I travel the world. I'm married to the love of my life, and I am a mom to an amazing little boy. I'm also the founder of Orion's Method, where you connect within, reclaim your power, and manifest your dreams. Welcome to my world, Orion's World. We go deep, we get real, and we rise. This isn't just a podcast, it's an activation. Let's go. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is a true pioneer at the intersection of science, wellness, and innovation, JP Errico. JP is an inventor, entrepreneur, and patent attorney with over 180 issued patents. He's a co-founder and chief science officer of ElectroCore, the groundbreaking company behind non-invasive vagus nerve stimulation technology. This isn't just futuristic tech, it's real and powerful tool being used right now to help people manage stress, anxiety, chronic illnesses, PTSD, and even support stroke recovery. JP's work is reshaping the way we think about healing, offering drug-free solutions that addresses the root cause, not just the symptoms. In this conversation, you'll hear how activating the vagus nerve can unlock the body's natural ability to regulate inflammation, boost mental health, and help you with so many things. In this conversation, you'll hear how activating the vagus nerve can unlock the body's natural abilities to regulate inflammation, boost mental clarity, and create lasting calm and resilience. If you're curious about the next frontier of health and how you can play an active role in your own healing or in the healing of a loved one, this is the episode for you. And now, without further ado, on to the show. Hi, JP, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So before we begin, maybe you can share one of your favorite childhood memories.
One of my favorite childhood memories. That's a long time ago. I'm dating myself. I had a very positive childhood, so I had a lot of positive memories. I remember going to the Grand Canyon with my parents. I remember lots of childhood memories with my grandparents. My grandparents on my mother's side were very close. My mother was an only child, so they were around all the time. So lots of them, and I had good friends that I was with a lot. So it's really difficult to pull out one memory, but I would say just summers by the pool. Summers at the and enjoying the water and and enjoying the warmth, because I grew up in New Jersey, which is not exactly a warm climate. Fortunately, I'm now in Florida.
No, it's really hot.
I migrated, but I like it. I like it hot.
Yeah, I like it hot, but I also like the 4 seasons. So I'm never satisfied. Anywho, so let's talk about what you do in the world. Like you're doing remarkable things, and I wonder, how did you get there? Like, how did you develop fascination in neuroscience and biohacking and all that?
It's a long and winding road. I was always interested in math and science. So as a child, it was always that I gravitated towards those classes in school and those topics when the opportunity arose. But I really, my father was a physician and my mother was a lawyer or had gone to law school. And so for me, I was always sort of between those two worlds. I didn't know where I was going to end up, and started thinking about blazing my own path as an engineer. So I ended up going to engineering school. I went to MIT, and I majored in aeronautical engineering. Really not for any specific reason. I didn't pick that because I was necessarily fascinated with that subject. In fact, to be perfectly honest, I asked people what the most difficult major to major in was, and people mentioned that as one of them. And I said, well, then I'll do it. It wasn't really for a love of it, other than just math and science. So when I got to my junior year there, I thought, well, what am I going to do once I graduate? What kind of graduate school am I going to go to? Am I going to go to business school? Am I going to go to something else? I knew I didn't want to be a doctor at the time. Maybe that was a mistake. I'm not sure. But I went on and I went to law school because, as I said, my mother had gone to law school, and she indicated that that was a place that was a good jumping point into anything. You didn't have to practice law in a law firm. You could go do other things. And she sort of knew that I was never going to do that. But it was a good education. And so I went on after that, after graduating, to work as a patent attorney for a brief period of time. And because that was sort of a good blend of law and engineering. But I was quickly recruited by my uncle, who's a world-renowned spine surgeon, to work with him to develop some new products in the spine field, which was a marriage of my engineering background, my legal work to help patent things, and sort of a new understanding or a new opportunity to learn about medicine. And that was over 25 years ago at this point, coming up on 30 years ago, believe it or not. And over the last 30 years, I've done everything from taking graduate level classes to studying all these books behind me on the subject, to doing research, to starting companies in the fields that were interesting to me. And neuromodulation was the area that sort of captivated me. I think if I have one memory that sort of drew me into it, I had the opportunity to participate or observe. I didn't really participate, but observe a deep brain stimulation surgery where they used deep brain stimulation technologies to treat a patient who had essential tremor, which is sort of like a Parkinson's-like movement disorder. Just magical. I mean, the patient literally had to be restrained with screws into his skull, and he was shaking like he had Parkinson's disease. And when they found the right spot to stimulate while he was awake, when they found the right spot, all of his movements stopped. All those shaking, Parkinson's-like tremors stopped. He could still talk. He could still do everything he otherwise would do normally. And it was just that symptom was gone. And I thought to myself, that's magical. There's no drug that can have no side effects and have that profound an effect. But this was doing that. And so I just decided that the next thing I got involved in was going to be in the neuromodulation field. And that just opened up everything.
What's neuromodulation? Is it affecting neurons? What does that mean?
Sure. So neuromodulation means changing how nerves in your body are firing and how they're working in order to affect some other change in the body that you're looking for. So in the example that's really profound, that we have spent a lot of time studying in vagus nerve stimulation, is the fact that if you stimulate the vagus nerve, you can affect the immune system in a way a lot like what you do with drugs like Humira and Enbrel and Remicade that suppress the immune inflammatory response when it's pathological. So, but we can do it in such a refined way, so much better than drugs, because drugs are sort of like a hammer. They hit the system in a way that there's no real control. You're just shutting all the inflammation down. That's why there's all the side effects of, you can't take it if you've got, tuberculosis, or if you've got other problems, and there might be cancers that arise. All of those things arise because the drugs are sort of simple. They're stupid. They just come in and they suppress everything that they're supposed to suppress, independent of whether or not that could harm you. When you modulate the nervous system sort of can calibrate how much your body needs in order to get back into a stable state. And so that's one of the we'll get into it, but some of the really fascinating things that I've observed with using vagus nerve stimulation and other forms of neuromodulation is that it resolves the problem you have without causing more problems, even if the problems that two people have are diametrically opposed. So I'll give you an example. High blood pressure and low blood pressure. Vagus nerve stimulation has the ability to normalize blood pressure in either direction. So whether you have low blood pressure, it can help bring your blood pressure back to normal.
That's amazing.
It really is. That's what neuromodulation is. As I said to many people, it's the closest thing to magic I've ever seen. It just does what you need it to do.
So you mentioned drugs, and so many people just believe all drugs, and they believe everybody with a white coat and what they prescribe to them. What's your take on conventional medicine and how we need to take control over our own health?
That's a great question, and it's kind of loaded. So I'm assuming that you have an opinion yourself.
It's a lot.
I'll come at it from a different perspective. There's a great book, and it's called The Last Man Who Knew Everything, and it's about a physician by the name of Thomas Young. And Thomas Young was a polymath. He was brilliant in many, many areas. He contributed to everything from metallurgy to history to medicine to optics. I mean, he just contributed in really, 12 different major fields in science and outside science as well. He lived 150 years ago, maybe more. In the last 150 years, there's so much information that's come out, and we're now at the pace of learning and creating new knowledge. We're doubling it every year, if not even sooner, faster than that. It's impossible. It's impossible for anyone to know everything, even within a narrow field within medicine. I mean, I've dealt with neurologists who don't know things that are that I consider to be really important. I've dealt with immunologists who know things that I consider to be really important. Now, I'm sure there's many, many things that they know that I don't. But what I think it is really important for individuals to take agency or ownership of their own medical care. And you have to be, first and foremost, your own advocate. So if you have something wrong with you, don't be satisfied with an answer, whether it comes from a medical professional, a professor in medical school. They don't know everything. They don't know most things. And as a result, you have to seek out your own knowledge and make certain that what they're prescribing or suggesting to you is something that's actually going to work for you, because it may not. Remember that medical studies are done over large populations of people that are not all the same.
And mostly male. They don't even do their research on female. And then they give the same medicine for, like, I don't know, 300-pound man, no, and like a 200-pound man and 100-pound women, and they get the same thing, regardless of their cycles of the month or being completely different anatomically. Yes.
And we now know that you can go in and get your genetic, your genetic alleles, your genetic code tested to see whether or not certain drugs are going to be effective for you or not, or whether or not your metabolism is going to function slightly differently. I mean, there are drugs out there that have side effects, but the side effects, if you really dig into it, the side effects are only in a group of people who have one specific genetic profile. And so think that if you get a genetic profile test, you could know whether or not you could take that drug safely, or whether or not you're going to experience some significant side effects.
Yeah. So I actually got my genetic profile. I just don't know where the report is. Need to look for it.
I'm sure it's floating around somewhere in Microsoft or Google's.
Somewhere in the cloud, yes. So tell me, let's talk about the vagus nerve. What is the vagus nerve? How does it affect your immune system?
Okay. So that's a big question. So the vagus nerve is your largest of the cranial nerves. So there's I think 12 or 13 different nerves that are labeled cranial nerves. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. It descends from the brainstem, comes out two little holes that are sit on either side of your base of your skull, and then run down your carotid arteries. They literally sit in the same tissue sheath that contains the carotid artery and the jugular vein, along with the vagus nerve. So it kind of tells you how important it is that it's in with those two important things. And then it travels down your neck, and then each branch, each side, will innervate all sorts of different organs in your chest and abdomen, your heart, your lungs, your spleen, well, actually not technically directly to your spleen, but we'll talk about that, your liver, your pancreas, all of your digestive system for sure. It's what some people refer to as the brain-gut axis. It's the way your brain is communicating with your organs to make certain that you're functioning in a healthy way. And when I say make certain, I don't just mean it's dictating to your body what to do. About 80% of those nerves are actually bringing information back up into your brainstem so that your brain can surveil your body and know what's happening. So specifically with respect to inflammation, back in the year 2000, a brilliant physician, he's a neuroscientist and neurosurgeon by the name of Kevin Tracy, identified something really fascinating. He was working on a small protein peptide molecule called CNI1493, which was later named cemipimod. And what he found was that if he injected that into animals, he could prevent them from having septic shock-like responses. And he was trying to figure out why it had that effect. And so, for reasons that I don't know, other than the fact that he was a neuroscientist and a neurosurgeon and interested, he injected tiny, tiny quantities of this material into the brain and found that even at those minute levels, he could still have the same effect. And so that suggested to him that, in fact, what the drug was doing was affecting the nervous system. And so that then led to a long line of research, and literally billions of dollars have been spent studying this, showing that the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, through the vagus nerve, controls your inflammation state. It controls nerves, it controls cells in your immune system called macrophages. It also controls things like platelets. And that control tends to push you back into a state of low inflammation, of health.
That's incredible.
It really is incredible. It's a biohack. I mean, honestly, I call it the greatest biohack of all time, because it not only affects your immune system, but your immune system has such profound effects on everything else that happens in your body. But even beyond that, they have subsequently found that the same pathways that the vagus nerve and vagus nerve stimulation use to control the immune system also has profound effects on mitochondria. And mitochondria are the power plants, the energy source for every cell in your body. I mean, they're providing the ATP that's used in all the biochemical reactions in your body. It's sort of like ATPs are sort of like the battery packs that proteins use. Proteins are like the little tools, the little electronic tools, and the ATP is the battery pack that allows those proteins to work.
So it sounds like you found the fountain of youth, basically.
It's funny because it's certainly a very, very, very important part of how life works.
Yeah, I mean, inflammation and energy, like that's what inflammation brings us down, and like having our mitochondria work really well and producing all that ATP, that's really important.
Yes, no question about it. In fact, I think there's really the four most important systems in the body, other than I'm not going to include the microbiome because that's really, really important too. But the four most important systems are your immune system, your cellular energy level, your ability to sense nutrients at the cellular level, we'll call it nutrient sensing, and then it's your autonomic nervous system. And all of those systems can be affected if you have some control over what's happening in your vagus nerve. If you control how your nerve is functioning, you can control your immune system, you can control your metabolism, and you can control, even at the cellular level, how you are sensing nutrients, whether or not you're in catabolism or anabolism, whether you're growing or you're sort of preserving things. It's a pretty amazing system that we have. We've been gifted this body and brain that are the most complicated systems in the universe that we are aware of, and no instruction manual. Nobody gave us like an instruction manual. It would be 1,000,000 pages long, but we have to figure it out for ourselves. But the good news is we're growing in our knowledge of how it works, and with every step we take, it shows itself to be so incredibly beautiful. It's really interesting, fascinating, and beautiful.
Yeah. Obviously, you're so passionate about it because you can help the world. So I just want to, because there is a gap between the story you told about that guy, doctor injecting that substance in the brain of animals to what you now came up with as far as non-invasive stimulation.
Yeah. So we have to step back again in history. It's amazing how brilliant people were back in the 1800s, 1700s. And there was a brilliant doctor by the name of John Leonard Corning, and he was based out of upstate New York. He's written, multiple, seminal works. But one of the things that he thought of was that stimulating the vagus nerve might be the reason why, or an alternative way to treat epilepsy and something called supraventricular tachycardia, which is a rapid heartbeat that actually hurts. And what he knew was that for hundreds of years, medical practitioners had known that if you take your thumb and you dig the thumb into the neck of a patient who's having an epileptic seizure that won't break, or is experiencing severe SVTs, that supraventricular tachycardia, that if you rub the carotid artery vigorously, you could stop a seizure, or you could stop these SVTs. And he knew that, and the prevailing thought was that the reason why it was effective was because somehow it was affecting the blood flow to the brain. But he was aware of the work by people like Volta and other people who had been looking at the effects of electricity on nerves. And he thought to himself, he was aware of the anatomy, and he said, I think what's really happening is that when you dig your thumb in and you're rubbing that area, you're actually affecting the vagus nerve. And so he came up with an instrument that sat outside the body and provided electrical stimulation, thinking that he could shock the nerves. Now, fortunately for me, and fortunately for us today, he didn't have a very good understanding of electrical engineering, and frankly, nobody did at that point. So he couldn't make it work. I'm sure he probably just ended up burning some people.
Oh my goodness.
He didn't mean to, but
in the name of science.
Horrible. No, what he did was he started a line of research which extended into the 1920s and 1950s and 1970s and 80s, where people looked to see, hey, what is the vagus nerve doing, and how is this structure important? Now, unfortunately, a lot of that work was really theoretical. It was really high level neuroscience. It never made it into standard medical training. And even to this day, if you go to medical school, in 4 years of medical school, you're going to spend about a half hour talking about the vagus nerve, which is, to me, phenomenal in how terrible that is.
And I think like half a day talking about nutrition or something like that.
They don't talk about nutrition. They don't prescribe exercise. They don't prescribe dietary things that need to be. Yeah, there's no question.
I need some more. Yeah,
they need some work. But so what happened was, in the 1980s, there was a company based in Texas in the United States called Cyberonics, and they decided to make an implanted device, much like a pacemaker, that would stimulate the vagus nerve, because they believed that stimulating the vagus nerve really had been a good idea 100 years earlier from John Leonard Corning, and that they were going to develop a a vagus nerve implant, a stimulator implant for epilepsy. And it took them a number of years to get it through the FDA, but it works. It works very well. It's expensive and you have to undergo surgery, but it can prevent you from having to have parts of your brain removed, which is one of the most invasive things that they do to treat epilepsy. So certainly you would think that before you go get a chunk of your brain removed, you'd have an implant put in your neck. What happened was that implant got through the FDA and was being used for about, 15 or 20 years. And two people came along. Kevin Tracy, who we talked about before, he did his work starting in the year 2000. I had no idea of the work that he had done. I knew just a little bit about what that had been done with cyberonics. And I was looking for something to do. I had just sold a company and I wanted to start something new.
Which company did you sell at that time?
It was a spine company that we had developed some artificial disc. We sold it to a large competitor, a large company in the orthopedic space.
Wow. Later I want to ask you about your creativity, but yeah.
So what happened was I was reading this article. It was a translation of something out of the old Soviet Union where they had taken, it was like from 1968. I mean, it's amazing. There's a lot of really interesting things that people back in history did that we've not followed up on. Frankly, the entire field of immuno-oncology really started back in the 1880s. It was a great work by Dr. Coley, who really was the godfather of immuno-oncology. But that's beside the point. What happened was in around 2004, 2005, I read this article, and it was from the old Soviet Union from 1968, where they had taken dogs and they had sensitized the dogs so that they would have an allergic reaction when exposed to egg white. And so they took a group of these dogs that they had sensitized and they divided them into two groups. One group just got the egg white challenge, had an anaphylactic reaction, and then they all died. The other group, I know, I love dogs. I hate when they do research on dogs. But the other group that they did, before they gave them that, what would be otherwise lethal challenge, they cut the vagus nerve. And when they did that, all the animals survived. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find where they followed up on any of that research. And there was parallel research done in the United States and England in the early 70s. But again, nobody followed up on it. It was just sort of there as, yes, the autonomic nervous system has some influence over the immune system. Well, I had been working with this neuroscientist and neurologist who was doing the deep brain stimulation. And he said something to me. His name is Ali Rezai. And he said something very interesting to me. He said, anytime anybody's ever cut a nerve, and as a result of cutting the nerve gained some clinical benefit from it, you may be able to stimulate that nerve and get the same benefit. And as I've told the story before, I really just stuck that piece of information in the back of my head and didn't do anything with it until I read this article. And when I read the article, I said, aha, maybe we can instead of cutting the vagus nerve, we can stimulate the vagus nerve and we can stop an anaphylactic reaction. And so it was early 2006. We went to Columbia University in February of 2006, and we worked with some research anesthesiologists who had sensitized animals this way, and we duplicated the work. We were able to give what would be a lethal anaphylactic reaction to the animal, but save its life by stimulating the vagus nerve. It was really remarkable. It was sort of one of those moments in science where you just want to be there. You just want to watch it and say, oh my God, this actually worked. And we had a couple others that were like that were really cool. Like when the very first time we ever used vagus nerve stimulation to treat an asthma attack was in our offices. We had a guy who worked for us who had asthma and he was wheezing. And I said, why don't you use your inhaler? He says, I hate the way it makes me feel. And I said, well, we actually have a doctor here. We actually have a physician. Would you like to try it? And he said, sure, let's do it. And we non-invasively stimulated his vagus nerve and his asthma attack stopped like instantly. And that was just sort of cool to watch, sort of cool to see and say, wow, that's an idea that I remember having, and now I'm watching a person actually recover from an asthma attack because of that. So it was fun.
So now you have a device that you're selling, right? For that?
So we have a company that has developed a non-invasive vagus nerve stimulator. It's handheld. In fact, I think I have one of the older versions right here. Um, just They're the electrodes. You put a little bit of gel on the electrodes. You place it over your vagus nerve, and you turn it on, and you hold it there, and you turn the amplitude up until there's directions on how to use it. It's pretty easy, and it will deliver a dose of vagus nerve stimulation to you that within 2 minutes is pretty remarkable what it can do. I mean, it can stop an asthma attack. We've done. We went through the FDA, a very long and arduous process, but we've been through it multiple times now for various different headache conditions, things like cluster headache and migraine, and some other very severe but thankfully rare headache conditions. We've also done work in PTSD. We've done work in stroke. We've done work in Parkinson's disease. We've done work in some autoimmune diseases. So I'm personally doing work right now in animal models looking to try to prevent autism and schizophrenia. And we're doing we've been invited to submit a proposal for trying to enhance the benefits of sleep when sleep is restricted. So when people can't get the full 7.5 to 9 hours that you need, you start to have cognitive problems over time that can get really bad, especially if the amount of restriction is extreme. And what we're trying to show is that with interventions, neuromodulation interventions that include vagus nerve stimulation, we can enhance the efficiency of sleep so that you don't have the same level of cognitive problems just because you've lost sleep, and emotional problems and other things, and even metabolic problems. So we're hoping to resolve quite a bit.
Yeah, so this device is not only for doctors, everybody can get it, correct?
Yeah. So there is a prescription version, which is called GammaCore. And then there is what we call a wellness version, which is called Truvaga, Truvaga. And the United States military is now deploying a version we make for them, or the company makes for them, because I'm actually not part of the company anymore. I was on the board of directors for 20 years, but I've the last 2 years, I've sort of moved into just a consulting role. But the company now sells also a product into the military called TAC-STIM. And the TAC-STIM device, it's made to be able to be run over by a car and things like that. But it's used because of the performance enhancement, the cognitive enhancement that it offers, which is a whole other area to discuss. And it's fascinating because I think that what they're doing is just the tip of the iceberg as to what vagus nerve stimulation can do for children and enhancing their cognitive development.
Is there another way to stimulate the vagus nerve without the device?
Yeah, we've known about how to stimulate the vagus nerve for thousands of years. Deep breathing techniques like yoga, deep breathing techniques. There's stretching. There's chanting and gargling and
Acupuncture.
acupuncture. I'm not an expert in acupuncture, but I suspect that there probably are ways to activate the vagus nerve that way. You can. There's some interesting research that suggests that if you alter the pH of the stomach, because remember, the vagus nerve is the brain-gut axis. So if you change the pH of the stomach, you can alter the firing rate of the vagus nerve and effectively stimulate it. And here's the reason why. The human stomach, when you are on an empty stomach, has a pH of about somewhere between 1.5 and 2. It's very acidic. In fact, it's one of the arguments that's been made why human beings are are basically carnivores. And the reason for that is to show that you have to have a very, very low pH in order to be able to digest animal meat. And human beings have an extraordinarily low pH. In fact, I think the only animal out there that has a lower pH than human beings is a vulture. So, I mean, dogs are at like 3 or 4. But once you eat food, by definition, that food is going to dilute the acid, and it's going to raise the pH in your stomach. Now, one of the things that the vagus nerve is doing is sending signals back up to the brain that are reinforcing the rest, digest, and restore mode. So think about it. If you eat, what signals should your stomach be sending to the brain? Rest and digest. So if you raise the pH of the stomach, the message that comes back up into the brain, because you've chemically altered the pH, it sends a message back up to the brain that it needs to be in the rest, digest, and restore state. And the opposite of the rest, digest, and restore state is stress, is the fight or flight mode. And what do we experience when we have that anxiety, that stress? We say our acid is, the acid in our stomach has become strong. Like we have our stomach hurts because the acid is so strong. We get reflux and all of those things. So you can see how the pH of the stomach is tied to that autonomic state.
So lots of celery juice.
Well, sodium bicarb is really, sodium bicarbonate, which is interesting because, and tying this back together with the work we did, the approvals for the GammaCore product in the United States are for migraine headaches and other types of headaches. Well, I've had conversations with neurologists who say, there's a really interesting thing. I've prescribed for migraine patients, drugs like triptans. I've even prescribed them drugs like the CGRP antibodies. I've prescribed them all sorts of medication. And I found that for some patients, the only thing that will work for them is Alka-Seltzer. And I said, well, okay, that's interesting. What's in Alka-Seltzer? Well, Alka-Seltzer is a combination of aspirin and sodium bicarbonate. And so what that's telling me is that those patients who have Alka-Seltzer helping them, they're going to benefit really well from vagus nerve stimulation. So there are other ways to stimulate the vagus nerve.
Yeah, but it seems like yours is very, very straight into the point and very maybe more quicker results, right? Like immediate, like that guy with the asthma attack. Immediately he was calming down and getting over his asthma attack. So it sounds amazing. What type of results you got in stroke patients, for example, with the home device?
Okay, so off camera we were talking about stroke. So this is an area of considerable research being done right now. So what this started for us back probably 8 or 10 years ago. A group at Harvard Mass General was interested in studying our device in stroke. And they had an animal model. And what they do is they take an animal, it's usually a mouse or a rat, and they expand a balloon, almost like a balloon catheter, inside the brain, inside one of the major blood vessels in the brain. And they expand it. So it's like a stroke. You're clotting off an area of the brain and making it not get any blood supply. Now, the area of the brain that is basically starved of oxygen is going to die very rapidly within 4 minutes. Okay. And then what they do is they deflate the balloon and they take that catheter out. And now blood is flowing again. Now, around that tissue that's now already died, around that tissue is a much larger area of tissue that is very stressed. It's been damaged. It's not dead, but it's under what we refer to as oxidative stress. And what you see is that it sends out signals that draw into that brain tissue, literally out from the blood vessels through the blood-brain barrier, it is pulling in immune cells. It's basically sending a signal saying, I'm hurt, there must be a problem here. And so those immune cells infiltrate into the brain, and the brain's own immune cells, called microglial cells, they become inflamed. And in almost a paradoxical response, they actually end up doing far more damage to the brain than the original insult. In fact, the actual area of the brain that, if you look a week later, the area of the brain that's now dead as a result of the combination of the initial, what we call anoxic, or basically reduction in oxygen flow from the original stroke-like balloon, and the subsequent damage is it's 2.5 times larger than if there wasn't that immune response. It's a significant problem. And so what the people at Harvard MGH did was they said, listen, we think that the effect that you're going to have with vagus nerve stimulation, or that we're going to induce, is going to reduce that damage, that collateral damage that happens after the initial insult, by a lot. When they did the studies, they found that that's in fact exactly what happened. We were able to reduce that collateral damage by 60 to 70%.
That's amazing. But what happens after that? Let's say the stroke has been there for 2-3 weeks and the damage has been done and maybe will expand. Like, does that still have a good effect on it? Or yes. Is it possible to reverse it?
So there's no way to reverse dead tissue. Okay, so the tissue that's actually dead is lost. But the brain is incredibly flexible. The human brain is capable of relearning how to do things through a process called neuroplasticity.
Yeah, creating new neural pathways to do the same action, right?
Exactly. And I'll give you, so when I first learned of this study that was conducted at MIT, I mean, it was years ago, but when I learned about it, it drove the point home as to how incredibly flexible the brain is. Okay. So what they did was they took animals. In this case, they were using ferrets. And they went into the ferret while the ferret was still in development inside the mother. Okay. So they did intra womb surgery, and they rewired the brain so that the optic nerve of these ferrets was going to connect to the auditory centers, not the visual centers. And they connected the auditory nerves to the visual centers. I mean, really, truly rewiring the brain. And then these animals were born. And you would think that having all of the optics, all the visual cues, all the visual signals going to the area of your brain that, is in charge of hearing, and then reconnecting the hearing nerves into the visual cortex, that these animals would be severely damaged, that they would be severely handicapped. And what they found was that the animals were entirely normal. They functioned absolutely fine. They could see exactly the same way other ferrets could see, and they could hear exactly the way other ferrets could hear. It's just that other areas of the brain were doing the jobs that were, had been rewired to. So that's the level of neuroplasticity that exists in the brain. That's the potential. What we need to do is do everything we can to enhance the ability of the brain to be neuroplastic, to be plastic. Vagus nerve stimulation does that. You can't do that level of plasticity training if your brain if your autonomic nervous system is in an inflamed or fight or flight sympathetically dominated state. You need to be in that digest and recover or restore state that is the parasympathetic state, so that the microglial cells, remember those microglial cells, which are the immune cells in the brain, they actually build the brain. I mean, in utero, they build the brain. They are responsible for all of the activity that goes on in the brain to keep it functioning properly, to learn, memory. All of those things are deeply tied to what the immune cells are doing. It's really, it's brain is really fundamentally an immune organ, more than what we think of as it's all neurons. It's really the central nervous system, the nervous system as a whole, and the immune system are really two sides of exactly the same coin, because there are neurotransmitter receptors on immune cells, and there are cytokine receptors. Cytokines are the chemicals that are released by immune cells that are on neurons. So they're communicating with each other all the time. Can vagus nerve stimulation assist in the recovery after a stroke? The answer is yes, there's work being done on that as well. And the reasons are, one, because of that neuroplasticity enhancement. And the second is because you want to have those microglial cells doing all the homeostatic things that they need to do in order to help the brain recover, help the brain relearn how to do things. Because every time you learn, those microglial cells are doing things to help the brain sort of rewire itself and reorganize the network so it can do new things.
Yeah, that makes sense, because after a stroke, the stress doesn't stop a week or two later. It continues, rehabilitation and learning how to live again and family dynamics. It's a lot. And I think everybody in the world can benefit from this. So if somebody gets the device, how many times a day should they do it, and what's the duration? What's a good nervous system stimulation that is daily?
Yeah, so for a variety of different reasons, I think that 2 to 3 times a day is all you need. It takes 2 minutes. I tend to tell people to do it twice a day. Keep one by your sink where you brush your teeth, or by your bedside. Do it before you go to bed. Do it after you wake up in the morning. It's when you brush your teeth. So you might as well do it during those 2 times. Leave it there. It takes 2 minutes. I always say to people, the dentist will tell you that you're supposed to brush your teeth for 2 minutes. Most people don't do it for 2 minutes. So since you're not going to be doing that, you might as well take the rest of that 2 minutes and stimulate your vagus nerve. That's for most things. Now, there are some conditions like asthma or migraine headaches or panic attacks or things like that occur almost randomly, at random. Seizures, for example. So while those twice a day on a regular schedule stimulations should reduce the risks of seizure, should reduce the risks of having migraines, should reduce the risks of having asthma attacks, should reduce the risks of having panic attacks, when those things do occur, or when you feel one coming on, that's a good time to use the device. So it's very portable. It fits, it fits in your chest pocket. I can put it in my shirt pocket. I can put it in a pants pocket. You can easily put it
in your shirt pocket. It's not that flattering in your pocket, but yeah, I get it. Small. It's convenient.
You're right. But if I wear a blazer, I can put it in the blazer pocket. It's very easy to take with you, and it's simple to use, and there's no reason why we don't suggest that people are driving down the road while driving doing it, but there's no reason why you couldn't do that. You want to keep your hands on the wheel, but you could do it in the passenger seat.
I think some driver needs to do it while driving.
Probably right.
Yeah. So what is one fact or some wisdom that I didn't ask you about that has to do with what you share in your book, the vagus immune connection, that everybody should know?
I'm going to say 2 things. One is what we touched on before, which is that most of the work that's been done in vagus nerve stimulation has been done in adults, especially the work that's been done on the cognitive enhancement side of things, which is the stuff that the military has been doing through the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, et cetera. But in my own experience, children who are in a constant developmental state from gestation all the way through into their early 20s, there's a tremendous amount of neurodevelopment that's happening. What I have seen and observed and read is that if children between the ages of 5 and 10 or even older are using this device twice a day, even if they don't have any medical problems or medical reasons for using it, if they're using it just as a wellness product, I believe it optimizes neurodevelopment. And I'm going to explain why I say that. Because as I said before, your brain is literally grown, developed, and built by immune cells. And when those immune cells get distracted by inflammation, they don't do their job ideally well. And unfortunately for us, there's no level of inflammation, sort of like so long as you stay below this level of inflammation, everything's fine. Any amount of inflammation will have some detrimental effect on neurodevelopment. And so it's probably a very big reason why people who are in stressed environments, who are undernourished, or children who grow up in, less than sanitary situations end up not performing as well in life because their cognitive development was impaired. Maybe not to the point of being, neurologically measurably impaired, in terms of being diagnosed as handicapped, but they've been handicapped. They've been injured by their surroundings. What you want to do is minimize the level to which that inflammation is preventing ideal neurodevelopment.
And is it safe to use the same device on kids? Is the stimulation too much for kids? Do you use less of it?
Nope. Unlike drugs, it doesn't need to be dosed that way. You can use it twice a day. My daughter started using it when she was 7 years old. It has had profound on her.
That is so exciting. I really want that device now. I want it. Give it to me now.
Who doesn't want to be smarter? I mean, let's face it. Being smart is helpful. So the other thing I was going to say is you mentioned also about aging and sort of finding the fountain of youth. Now it's not going to make you live forever.
I know, but as long as you balance your like if your mitochondria performs and your ATP production is amazing and you have less inflammation in your body, you're gonna look and feel younger for longer.
So you've just touched on 2 of the 12 hallmarks of aging. So the hallmarks of aging are the phenomena that accompany aging in all circumstances. That includes telomere attrition, epigenetic drift, malfunctioning autophagy, nutrient sensing deregulation, dysbiosis, all of those things. So I have a paper that's, I hope, coming out soon, in which we talk about the fact that every single one of the hallmarks of aging get worse. They accelerate, they get worse, the damage is more severe if you are in a chronically sympathetically active state. So if you're always in fight or flight.
Oh my goodness. I'm in fight or flight since I arrived to Israel. Seriously.
You're absolutely right. I'm sure that living in Israel is a constant fight or flight situation.
Yeah, it's pretty intense these days, yes.
But if you can get yourself back into that rest, digest, and restore state on a regular basis.
Yeah, I work on myself all day. Like I do a lot of meditations and calming my nervous system in different ways. But it sounds amazing just to have a device for 2 minutes and be like, I'm good again. I can tackle the day. Woohoo!
Yeah, so we were talking about aging and the fact that basically every single one of the hallmarks of aging get worse when you're in chronic sympathetic or fight or flight mode. And if you can get yourself back into that rest or digest and restore mode, you actually see all of the hallmarks either reverse, slow down, or get better. So it is a remarkable tool for at least living as long as possible and living in a healthy health span as opposed to just lifespan.
Incredible. JP, you are incredible. You're a brilliant mind, and it just seems like you're doing a lot for humanity. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom. If people want to reach out, get your book, get the device, where do they go?
So the book, as you said, is The Vagus Immune Connection. It's available on Amazon. So feel free. It's in paperback version now, so it's not too expensive, and it's got a lot of the things we talked about in there, and goes into a little more depth. gives people a really good scientific intuition for things. If you want to reach out to me on Instagram, I'm as the VNS guy, so it's THEVNSGUY. That's my handle. Everywhere else, it's JP Errico, so it's JPERRICO.com. If you want to go there, I have some interesting things that people can look at, and if people want to direct message me, I'm available. I would love to answer questions about this or anything else that people have. I try to be as responsive as I can be. And the last thing is, I host a podcast, as you do. It's called the Health Upgrade Podcast, and so I have a co-host, Dr. Nawaz Habib. He's a great guy, and the two of us tackle all sorts of topics from atherosclerosis to human reproduction to headaches and mental health conditions. So it would be wonderful if people want to tune in and listen to it.
Thank you, JP. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners. Take care of yourself. Take care of your brains. Relax, stimulate your vagus nerve, and have a stellar life. This is Orion. Till next time.